Thank you very much, Jude. I'm very happy on behalf of the Green Party Cointas Class to support this bill, to commend Deputy Collins for introducing it, for Senator Black initiating it in the Seanad, co-signed by my colleague Senator Grace O'Sullivan. I spoke briefly to Cancórla at our 100th anniversary of our founding of Dáil Éireann, and the central message I made was that we have to play our part in trying to create a world at peace. And I think that behoves us to take a position on this critical issue, one of the critical issues of our time. For what is happening in Palestine is simply wrong. It's not justified, it's not legal, it's not morally correct. And we have consistently taken that position. I think we need to follow it up now and act to actually carry through what we say in words. I wanted in my few short minutes maybe just to address or reflect on some of the comments that the Minister made in his speech to make the counter-argument. Firstly, he argues that the EU trade rules preclude us from doing anything and cites, I think, our own example in our own current negotiations with the UK. But I think that actually shows, just as we will argue if there is a no-deal hard border, that the application of whatever market rules on our border has to have a political context as well as just a narrow reading of the rules. Well, similarly, when it comes to the trading with the settlements, and it's not against the State of Israel or Israeli people, it's very specific and targeted in what we are proposing here, there is a political context that has to be taken into account. With regard to his supposition that in doing so we would be breaking EU law, I think I'd put it in a slightly different way. We would certainly be testing it, or could be testing it, if a challenge was made. But sometimes it's the right thing to do to seek such a challenge and to await and to go to the European Court of Justice and make the case and let that court then decide. Sometimes laws are there to be changed or the dial to be moved, and you can only do that by really testing the law, which is what we would be doing here. Similarly, with regard to what the Minister has said regarding that we shouldn't do this for fear that we might affect the centre of gravity of what's happening in the Middle East, in Middle East policy, and we might lose our influence. Well, I'm sorry, but what I see the centre of gravity in global political response to the Palestinian issue is simply wrong. And it's actually the centre of gravity is heading in the wrong direction, where we see the US government deciding to set up their embassy in Jerusalem, which we know is completely contrary to where we should be going. We need to act in our small way, and sometimes we can, as small as we are as a state, we can shift the centre of gravity globally, and that's what we should be attempting to do here. With regard to the Minister's contention that we might face difficulties with US and other companies in the application of these sanctions, I would cite the example where we take a directly opposite view, as I understand, Minister, in regard to the threats by the US government again to take sanctions against those companies or countries who are not following their rule with regard to the Iran deal. Well, that's similar. We don't always have to follow what that US administration says, and I think it's right and appropriate for us here to set our own course. Lastly, politically, I'm deeply concerned that the Minister is intimating in his speech that the government would use the money message mechanism to stop it going to committee stage. Minister Taoiseach, you have to be very careful with the use of the whole range of different pieces of legislation now, where you're using such mechanisms to stymie further debate and the progress of legislation. I believe the reason why there's universal agreement, as I hear within the opposition in support of this motion, because it reflects that as the will of the Irish people. And we have to be careful that we're not using statutory or standing orders mechanisms to actually stymie that effort. I believe the Irish people want to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people today. This mechanism is a completely appropriate, legitimate and, in my mind, legal approach. We should take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ryan.